Microphone's on. It is hot. There we go. Y'all ready for another round? They say it's coming. Hope you don't have to go anywhere tomorrow.
Might as well be ready.
Say again?
Might as well be ready.
Might as well be ready. Well, Andy, your problem is you need people to come to you, not that you need to go anywhere, right? Right.
No, I'll probably have snow to shovel.
Okay. Yeah, but you're not getting paid for that, right?
No,
Your,
not.
your dad pays you the shovel?
Well,
We need to work a deal out on that.
no, it's a lose-lose. It's more peaceful if I shovel than if I don't.
There you go. All right, I think we're live. Thank you, Clark. Clark's been doing extra duty these last few days. How did things, do we have new speakers tonight?
Yep.
That's what I'm hearing. Yeah, excellent. No wonder I sounded so good. It's new speakers. Can y'all tell the difference?
Yeah.
How many we have in here? 4 or 6? We have 4, yeah. Sounds like we have about 18. So that's good. How did it go today? Getting that, they finished or they got more to do?
They need one more part to do the foyer speaker, but we've got nursery and choir and speakers replaced.
All right.
Next week we'll get foyer.
Okay. Well, fortunately, the foyer is not that far from in here. So, Andy, you'll let us know if it still works out there on Sunday, right?
No.
There's 4 speakers have been put in. What else has been done?
New amp and a new digital mixer, and they fixed a problem they found in the wiring, the speaker wiring they found.
Good.
And then the nursery speaker and cry room speaker are replaced, and they both have volume controls in the room, so you can zero them out or adjust them how you want. And the foyer one will likewise have a control.
Awesome.
And so the 4 speakers still has to be done, and what else?
That's
For,
it.
for this phase, that's it, but the next step is we're gonna study, how many assistive listening devices we might need for people. Because if we try to crank these up to satisfy everybody, then some people are gonna be blasted. So,
Yeah. Some of us had enough rock and roll in our early years. We don't need to add to that. Yeah. Hi, Penny. Come on in. We did hear today that Jerry Johns has gone home from the hospital, so that's good. He's better. Did Donna say anything specific?
No, he's better, but he still didn't have an appetite. He's still kind of weak.
Okay, so we'll continue our prayers for him. Anybody else? Sue, you know anybody else we need to update or?
No, I haven't heard of anybody else.
Okay.
Was Jerry able to go to his pain appointment today?
Was Jerry what?
Did he go to his pain appointment?
She didn't say, did she?
There's a medicine that he takes that is
Right.
contributed to it, but he was supposed to have that appointment today.
I think she would have said if, anything we do would be assuming, so. She did not indicate that he did not go. So, yeah. Thank you. I need lots of people watching out for me. Clark, would you word a prayer for us tonight as we begin?
Heavenly Father, holy is your name. We are so thankful, Lord, that you permit us to come together in freedom to study your word, to draw closer to you, to encourage each other. We pray that you'll be with those who are sick, and especially those who want to be here but can't be here. Lord, we pray that your hand will heal them. Help us to be a light that shines to the world, that
You know, masks have been around too long when you don't just automatically take it off. I forgot till just now that I was wearing a mask. Ezra 8 tonight. And just so you won't get tense, we're not going to read the first 14 verses. Lots of names, a few numbers in there. But I will start with a little disclaimer. My purpose in teaching is not to say, I got all the answers. I know exactly what is being said. I prefer more stirring things up and continuing the conversation and continuing to think about how the text applies to us today. What difference does it make in the way we live? And so there's a couple of things in here that I think are harder than some other things. And we may or may not be in the same place, and I'm just saying I'm okay with that. Chapter 8 begins kind of going backwards. Again, Ezra is not doing a timeline. He's not just telling a point-by-point history. You know, last week he arrived back in Jerusalem and kind of talked about some of the things that happened there. He's going to kind of now back up and start with the trip. And so it's not in chronological order. But chapter 8 starts with him listing the family heads and if that come back with him. And there's a couple of things that happen in that, but basically think in terms that there were about 1,500 family heads, men, that are coming back. So that does not constitute the entire number. These guys would be married, they would have children. It talks about the children coming, their whole household coming. And so this is a pretty big group of people. And you can read all of those names and chase any of them that you like, but we're going to really pick up in verse 15 of chapter 8. He says he's assembled them at the canal that flows in the Ahava, the river. They stay there 3 days, so you can imagine not everybody got there exactly at the same time. They're gathering and people showing up, and they're getting ready for a long journey. This is the same journey we talked about, probably about 900 miles, about 4 months long. But one of the things that happens as he looks at the group that's gathered there are priests, but he found no Levites. And I don't know that I always, growing up, had an appreciation for the difference in those things. The priests were kind of the front line people, and the Levites were the ones in support doing important necessary work. And so this is a problem. If they're going back to help restore the worship in Jerusalem, and he's not taking any Levites with them, that's problematic. And so he describes how he picks some guys, seems to be very intentional in who he picks. And verse 17, he ordered them to go to Iddo, and he's going to look for some Levites to come with them. Now, consider what he's doing here. He's already gathered and made, hey, we're going back. Do you want to join us? People have made their decision. He's going to have to apply a little bit more pressure, might be one word you'd use, influence, make the need known. And when he does that, there are 20, look down in verse 19, there are 20 in all that he convinces, Levites. So understand what this means. That'd be like me coming to you and saying, hey, we're moving to California and I need you to go. You might have to think about that, right? Even if it was an important mission, even if it was something you supported, to uproot everything you have and travel for 4 months and settle in a country you've heard about your whole life, but had never even been to probably. So they get 20 Levites to go. And then verse 20 says they also brought 220 temple servants, a body that David and the officials had established to assist the Levites. So during the snow tomorrow, if you're just bored and you need a rabbit to chase this one. Because this is fascinating. Who are these temple servants? What is their official status? And you get a lot of different ideas. One, does this go all the way back to the Gibeonites? You remember who the Gibeonites were? Joshua marched into the promised land. They conquer by marching around it 13 times, the city of Jericho. And now they continue their campaign, and the word is out. These Israelites mean business. And you remember, they were to displace and take hold of the entire land. And why they were, after they get past Ai, they're met by these Gibeonites who tell them, in fact, it's a ruse, you remember? They dress up in really old clothes, dusty clothes, and tell the Israelites, we've heard about you, we came from far off, and we think you're great. Well, they didn't. They came from close by. They just didn't want to be the next ones that are wiped out. And without consulting the Lord, the Israelites say, okay, we won't wipe you out. We'll find a place for you. And even though it was a ruse, and even though they didn't take the steps they could have, one thing I was always impressed with is they honored their deal. When they found out the premise that it was built on, they didn't go, oh no, everything's off, this contract is null and void. But they did make them carry wood and carry water, which probably was some of the most labor-intensive things. We don't get that, right? We hit the thermostat and we turn the faucet and there it is. Unless you've been living in Texas the last couple of days, and then you have a little different relationship with that. Our son in Abilene said you'd turn on the faucet and it would just kind of drip out. We're not used to that. And they've been pretty much shut down. He had to find other place to stay because he had no heat in his house. And some of you probably have friends that you've talked to, and they're in Austin, Texas, and it's 34 degrees in the house. Well, this was the kind of thing I think the Gibeonites were saying, we don't have to struggle, and this is a better situation. Some people think these temple servants go all the way back to the Gibeonites. Others would disagree, but that's part of the thing you can chase. It does appear, because some of the lists in Ezra and other places that mention these temple servants or the servants of Solomon, or here we find out, hey, it was David who kind of started these temple servants, appear to be foreign named people. And maybe different than the way I was taught, even as far back as most of their history, they found ways that people who wanted to be worshipers of Yahweh, for them, even though they're not born Jewish, to have a part and have a significant part. They could be, they might be slaves, but I think the idea here is even in the temple, there was appropriate for service for people who were not born Jewish. And that certainly seems to be the case. And now lay that down, when they asked for more, they got 20 Levites, and they got 220 temple servants. Maybe if you're called temple servants, you're eager to go back to the temple and do what your job describes. And perhaps they were slaves. I just think that's fascinating, because sometimes we skip over those details, and we have to always remember, I can't understand their full culture and everything that was happening and everything that transpired to this point. But there was a connection, and it was important. So whether they're called Solomon's servants or temple servants, whether or not they go all the way back to the Gibeonites, the Jewish people did find a way for those who had respect for Yahweh to come into the fold. So the choice was, do you follow Yahweh or not? And they made room for those who chose to follow. So let's pick up in verse 21. So they're at the canal, at this river, and Ezra says, I proclaimed a fast, so we might humble ourselves before God and ask him for a safe journey for us and our children and all our possessions. So this is a big moment. This is not a scouting expedition. They are all in. They're taking their family, they're taking everything they own, and they're moving 900 miles. And so I think appropriately, remember Ezra's a teacher. He knows the law. And he pauses and realizes we need to be in the right posture with God. He doesn't elevate himself because the king is sending him on this important mission. Rather, he understands who's really sending him and humbles himself, and not just himself, but the people. Now, I find verse 22 fascinating, and you can see it different than I do. This is one of those places. I was ashamed to ask the king for soldiers and horsemen to protect us from enemies on the road, because we had told the king, the gracious hand of our God is on everyone who looks to him, but his great anger is against all who forsake him. So we fasted and petitioned our God about this, and he answered our prayer. Now, it'd be really easy to say, well, if you believe in God, everything turns out the way you want it. That's kind of how we've said it. I'm putting that pretty crassly, but isn't that kind of what we've leaned into from time to time? I haven't found that because I believe in God, everything turns out the way I want it to turn out. That there's some kind of magic spell that is good for me. I do think it's interesting that Ezra says he was ashamed to ask the king. And I don't think it would have been sinful to ask the king. Because what has the king already said and already done? He said, let's fund this. Let's get you back there. I'm all in for restoring the temple. Ezra is ready to go back. The temple is being taken care of, but now reestablish, the practices of serving Yahweh. So I have a hard time thinking that's totally just it. But sometimes we do similar kind of things, right? I heard somebody say in the last week or so, they showed up somewhere, didn't have a mask, they were outside. He said, God is my mask. Well, I find it dangerous to claim things for God that may or may not be accurate, right? Because if he does get COVID from that experience, what is that going to say about God, or what is he going to think about himself? I don't think the promise is, believe in me and everything goes like you want it to. The promise is, I will be with you, right? And let's think about this group. What else could be going on that Ezra said he was ashamed to ask the king for men to go? And here's the kicker. I was going to save it to the end, but I'll just throw it in here. In just a short time, in a couple of years, there's another group coming back. This time led by Nehemiah. We'll get there in a few weeks. And when the king says, do you want me to send protection with you? What does Nehemiah say? Yes. And it doesn't seem to be a problem. Nobody says, Nehemiah, aren't you trusting God to just work everything out like you want it to? So there's something else going on here with Ezra. And so if nothing else happens tonight, you go home thinking about it and wondering, what in the world was going on? How was he ashamed to ask the king? So let's realize he had 1,500 men, at least. They would have been armed. They knew how the world worked. They knew how the empire worked. They knew this road was dangerous. There would have been others, at least older teenagers, if not other men in their household. They are not going unprepared or unequipped. And maybe the embarrassment is, as well equipped as they are, and as important as their mission is, for them to come back and say, now we need more. Maybe that was the embarrassment.
Maybe Ezra just got finished telling the king about God takes care of us and so on.
Yeah.
And then 2 days later you say, by the way, we need soldiers.
Exactly.
Maybe Nehemiah didn't just get finished doing that. Maybe Nehemiah didn't have 1,500 men and so on.
Right. And so, again, you're saying exactly what I want to do. What's going on here? What do we... Let's don't take the superficial and just make an assumption and then try to apply that to our life. Ezra, as strong and as good a leader as he is, maybe has a moment of doubt. That's okay. This was going to be a scary thing. And when he was faced with the idea, where am I going to put my trust? And I'm not talking about the kind of trust that says nothing's going to happen. But in the kind of trust, God has prepared us. He's brought the men I need to have. He has given us provision, and he'll be with us. And by with us, I don't mean nothing bad happens. Right? What's interesting to me is we find out they get to the other side, and we don't have any story about the journey. So you might go, well, nobody attacked them. Well, I don't know that that's fair to say. Maybe they were attacked, and they were prepared. They had a good strategy. I don't know how big these band of bandits were, but when several thousand people come marching down the road, maybe that was protection enough, that they're too big, they're too well armed. But I think the point here is just because there was the potential for bad to happen, Ezra was not going to be stopped from going toward his mission and what he wanted to see happen. And maybe the difference in Ezra and Nehemiah was Ezra was going to restore better the practice of worshiping Yahweh. When Nehemiah comes back, it's to build a wall around a city. It's more governmental. It's less religious in that nature, even though there are religious overtones. And look what Ezra does next in verse 24. Then I set apart 12 of the leading priests, and I won't mispronounce their names for you. He names 2, and then 10 other brothers. And he weighs out the silver and the gold, and there's quite a bit. 24 tons of silver. There's silver articles that weigh 3.75 tons. 3.75 tons of gold. And 20 bowls of gold valued at 1,000 derricks. Now, derrick was a coin. Probably had the picture of King Darius on the back. He was often pictured as an archer. And so that would have been by weight. They think it's about 19 pounds of just gold. But there's 2 kinds of things that are going back. Sometimes it's just the gold, and sometimes it's these elements that are already created, these bowls. There's 2 of them here. It says 2 fine articles of polished bronze as precious as gold. The metal didn't make them the precious, but the finish, the art, created value in them. So some of these things that were already formed into articles would have been considered sacred and would have been handled differently than just a bag of gold. Does that make sense? And so he's calling these Levites and these priests to handle the articles with the respect that they need and they deserve. But he's making a plan. How are we going to get this across? And look what he's doing. He's including, in a sense, the whole community. It's not just Ezra's job. It's not the job of the king's men to get this safely across. It's all of them together. And maybe that's the difference in what Ezra was trying to do. He wanted these people who were exiting exile, you like that? Exiting Babylon and going back to Judea to say, this is our mission. It's on us in the sense that God is with us, but we're not just passive participants. Whatever happens is God's will. We have to be ready. We have to prepare. We have a plan. We have a strategy. Verse 28, I said to them, you as well as these articles are consecrated to the Lord. To me, that's a key phrase. It's not just the items that are consecrated to God. It is us. The example that keeps coming back to me is when David was going to offer a sacrifice for his sin, and he was offered, again, the place and the sacrifice. And you remember what he said. I think we talked about a few weeks ago. I won't sacrifice to the Lord something that costs me nothing. Maybe what's going on here is we say we're all in on this. We need to show that. To go back to the king now and say, maybe we're really not. We need you to do this. Maybe that's the embarrassment. The silver and gold are a freewill offering to the Lord, the God of your ancestors. Guard them carefully until you weigh them out in the chambers of the house of the Lord in Jerusalem before the leading priests and the Levites and the family heads of Israel. So then they get it. All we know. This is all we know about the trip. On the 12th day of the first month, we set out. The hand of our God was on us, and he protected us from enemies and bandits along the way. So we arrived in Jerusalem. So that 4 months is just kind of condensed, and I just want to know more. And maybe it was just that boring. A caravan that size could probably make 9-10 miles a day, and that's why it took so long. There was a lot of taking up camp, packing up, going down the road, setting back up, redoing it. I do prefer the drive down the road, check in, open the door, have a bed. I like that better, but certainly that was not their way of getting there. And so then in 33 and 34, they get in, they do weigh everything out, everything's arrived, they've been faithful in caring for these things. Verse 35, they offer the sacrifices. And, I try to stop, especially stories from the Old Testament, and try to put myself. What were they thinking? What were they feeling? After this long, dangerous journey to arrive and then be in Jerusalem at the restored temple and being able to offer these sacrifices, joining those that had already returned. And then verse 36, they're able to talk to the governors, and just as the king had ordered, these folks gave them assistance to the people and to the house of God. So that's chapter 8. And that's Ezra talking about his return. And now we're going to go into chapter 9 and begin to understand a little more about the situation he's coming back into. You remember back in chapter 7, let's go back to verse 10 of chapter 7, because remember this is happening at that same time, at least, of part of 7. We were told in verse 10, Ezra had devoted himself to the study and the observance of the law of the Lord and to teaching its decrees and laws in Israel. That's what Ezra came to do and has been doing. He may not have just done it in the city of Jerusalem. He may have been out teaching and making connection and going about the business of this study, not just to himself, but the idea of studying and teaching the people what they were to observe. And maybe because of that teaching is where we find ourselves in chapter 9. After these things have been done, the leaders came to me and said, the people of Israel, including the priests and the Levites, have not kept themselves separate from the neighboring peoples with their detestable practices, like those of the Canaanites, Hittites, Pezerites, Jebusites, Ammonites, Moabites, Egyptians, and Amorites. They have taken some of their daughters as wives for themselves, and their sons have mingled the holy race with the people around them. And the leaders and officials have led the way in this unfaithfulness. So I think this is another place that we have to stop and really see what's happening here. It'd be easy to lift this out and say, oh, our purpose is to be separate. Our purpose is to be pure genetically, right? It's that these outsiders came in. I don't think that's the emphasis. The emphasis was by connecting with those around them, they were going into the practices, the idolatry that had been practiced. In fact, it was that idolatry that 150 years before had sent them into exile. Guess what? It hasn't gone away. It's still there. It's still happening. And so let's look at a couple other things. Now, if you're reading the NIV, verse 2, it says, they have taken some of their daughters as wives and have mingled the holy race with the peoples around them. I think race, at that moment, that word is unfortunate to use. One, in that day and time, their concepts of race are different than what ours are. Really, the way we talk about race today didn't start happening until about 1700. The idea that there were genetically separate races. They certainly understood people were different and looked different, and they treated different people based on all kinds of things differently. But for us to just take that word and use it the way we would use it is probably a mistake. It actually says holy seed is the pure translation. So what is that idea? Well, another place that holy seed is used, just to kind of lean into this idea a little bit more, is Isaiah chapter 6. And Isaiah in chapter 6 is ask a question. Then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, whom shall I send, and who will go for us? And you know Isaiah's response. Here I am, send me. And God said, okay, go tell the people this. Again, this is pre-exile. Be ever hearing, but never understanding. Be ever seeing, but not perceiving. Yeah, you're saying the right words, you're hearing the right things, but you're not getting it. It's not connecting to the way you live. Make the heart of this people calloused. Make their ears dull and close their eyes. Otherwise, they might see with their eyes and hear with their ears and understand with their hearts and turn and be healed. Then I said, how long, O Lord? And he answered, until the cities lie ruined and without inhabitant, until the houses are left deserted and the fields ruined and ravaged, until the Lord has sent everyone far away and the land is utterly forsaken. Now, we're on the other side of that. We know when that was, right? When the Babylonians came and ravaged the land and took them away. But look at verse 13. And though a tenth remains in the land, it will again be laid waste. But as the terebinth and oak leave stumps when they are cut down, so the holy seed, same word that's used in Ezra, will be the stump in the land. In other places, it's referred to as the remnant, right? The little piece that's left. So remember, Ezra is returning 80 years after the first group came back. And in that time, the problem that sent them into exile is still the problem. And that has a huge impact on Ezra because he came back teaching. And it may be because of his teaching that the leaders even say, oh, wait a minute. We've not stayed focused. Even though we're that stump, we're not acting like that stump. We're not the holy seed, the people who have retained this relationship with Yahweh.
Kind of a deja vu from the time of Josiah when they found the scroll and the foundation, and they start reading it aloud. Everybody says, "We haven't been doing this stuff.
Right.
We haven't been keeping the Passover and the Sabbath, and whatever."
Because they've ignored all of that. They've
Reading
yeah.
the word out loud suddenly convicted them. They suddenly realized we didn't do that.
And notice how Ezra responds. When I heard this, I tore my tunic and cloak, pulled hair from my head and beard, and sat down appalled. Then everyone who trembled at the words of the God of Israel gathered around me because of this unfaithfulness of the exiles, and I sat there appalled until the evening sacrifice. Then at the evening sacrifice, I rose from my self-abasement with my tunic and cloak torn and fell on my knees with my hands spread out to the Lord my God and prayed. I am too ashamed and disgraced, my God, to lift my face to you because our sins. Now wait a minute, is this something Ezra has done? This one's harder for us because Ezra, I think, appropriately understands the corporate nature of this sin. It's not because these individuals did that. We as a nation have not turned to God as we should have. Because our sins are higher than our heads, and our guilt has reached the heavens. From the days of our ancestors until now, our guilt has been great, because our sins, we and our kings and our priests have been subject to the sword and captivity, to pillage and humiliation at the hand of foreign kings, as it is today. So it's 80 years after the return, and it doesn't feel like they've gotten anywhere in their dedication to God. But now, for a brief moment, the Lord our God has been gracious in leaving us a remnant and giving us a firm place in his sanctuary. Now, some of the more literal translations will say a peg in his holy place. I like that picture even better. There's two parts to that. When it was still a tabernacle, they would have had tent pegs. The very things that hold up the grandeur, right? They're little things, but important. But it was also, this is hard for us to believe because we take our closets and stuff them full and are glad to have a door that nobody can see behind, right? You got any kind of closets like that? Please don't open that door. I don't know what'll fall out. They didn't have closets. They didn't have storage like that. The way they kept things in their house was to have a peg on the wall and things were put there securely, right? You could hang whatever it is on the peg. And maybe the idea is Ezra is saying, God has been more gracious to us than we deserve, and he still gives us a place, a peg, a safe place, a place of safety. He still invites us in to his holy temple, to be in relationship with him. Because it's real easy when we mess up big to go, how can God love us? How can God care for us? One thing I want to take out of Ezra is even in the midst of majorly missing it, Ezra still realized that God has given us a peg in the temple, a place of safety and security. Can we not go to that? Can we not be drawn to God? God has not abandoned us. What has happened? But let me back up. Okay. And so our God gives light to our eyes and a little relief in our bondage. Though we are slaves, and you were drawing parallels to Josiah a while ago. Let's also draw this as a parallel to Egypt, right? Coming out of Egypt, they're coming out of exile. Verse 9, though we were slaves, our God has not forsaken us in our bondage. He has shown us kindness in the sight of the kings of Persia. He has granted us new life to rebuild the house of our God and repair its ruins. And he has given us a wall of protection in Judea and Jerusalem. Sometimes we think, if I don't have freedom, I can't do anything. I need to be free. But what is Ezra saying here? He said, I don't have to have freedom from Persia in order to have life and freedom in God. This king may call me his slave, his servant, but that doesn't mean he is my master. And why haven't we realized that? Why as a country do we continue to this God who is so gracious not return that graciousness, right? I mean, one of the most dissonant things is when somebody shows you kindness and you return harshness to them, right? If you witness that out in public, just that happening, a clerk is helping and gentle and kind, and you see somebody berate them, don't you just want to go smack that person, right? Because it's out of order, it's out of sequence, it's not what should happen. And isn't that what Ezra is saying? How can we have such a gracious God in the midst of everything that we've done, and yet he still wants us? How could we not just want to return that to him? I think that's part of what we can take from this. Verse 10, and we're not going to quite get to the end. There's some more good stuff, but let's get to a stopping place, and I'll give you some things to think about. But now our God, what can we say after this? For we have forsaken the commands you gave through your servants, the prophets. The land you are entering to possess is a land polluted by the corruption of its people, by their detestable practices. They have filled it with their impurity from one end to the other. This is what he had told them. Verse 12, therefore do not give your daughters in marriage to the sons, or take daughters for your sons. Do not seek a treaty of friendship with them at any time, that you may be strong and eat the good things of the land, and leave it to your children as an everlasting inheritance. This is not ethnic nor racial. They weren't a better race of people. They weren't a better culture, except for their relationship with Yahweh. And not to be exclusive, this spiritual relationship would have been open to anyone who would call upon the name of the Lord. So a little different picture. So next week, we'll pick up with these detestable practices and what it means and the outcome of that, and then how Ezra leads the community for the very thing he set out from Babylon to do. Glad you're here.